that one.
Okay.
EA Sports has released its. And so while you are evaluating that at number 13, I am going to find the rankings, because if somebody would hit me with, as you did a few days ago, EA Sports defensive rankings, Iowa's at number 13, this is ridiculous. My initial thought is absolutely it's ridiculous. But to be fair, I would like to look at the top 12 again to see who we're competing against in this. But that would seem to be a snub for the Hawkeyes.
I don't know how EA Sports, like, I know everybody's excited about this EA Sports college football game. And I told somebody the other day on my live show, I'll probably buy the game just to have it, but I'm not a gamer per se. I do own a game system, but I've never been that guy. I was glancing through the 12 teams ahead of Iowa, Mark. The only thing I could think of is you have EA Sports, which obviously functions based upon computer rankings. I think a lot of that's probably based upon talent evaluation and projecting. You probably have a bunch of guys on the defensive side who are rated collectively better than the guys on Iowa's defense per their computers, because I look at the teams ahead of Iowa and they're all powers. Every single one of them is a power, with the exception maybe being Utah, you could argue, but every single one of these teams is a blue blood. Prove me wrong, Mark. Every single one. They basically just put every blue blood out there and said, if you've recruited exceptionally well, you're going to be ahead of Iowa, or you're going to be on this list. I think it's a crappy list, frankly.
Okay, so I tend to agree with you. However, again, it's much like when you hear the criticisms of the NCAA men's basketball tournament field of 68, and different analysts will throw out 10 teams that should have been selected. Well, you need to throw out the 10 that should not have been selected then. So I'm with you. Iowa has a great defense and always has a great defense, or a really good defense. I tend to back off on the term great. I think it's overused, but an extremely good defense, one of the best in the country. With better competition, we shall see. But I do think that they're legitimately a great defense from year to year in the recent 4 or 5 seasons. Ohio State was an exceptional defense last year. In my opinion, during the regular season, it was impossible. And I could have argued Ohio State, best defense in the Big Ten. I could have argued Iowa. I could have argued Penn State. I could have argued Michigan. They were all exceptional. Now, once I saw Michigan play in the playoffs in the national championship game, I thought, okay, I have to give it to them, because they were so impressive against Alabama and Washington as well.
I just want to make something very clear. As of last season, as of the completion of last season, and I know some of this is projecting forward, I assume. I guess that's what we're assuming with these defensive power rankings. As EA Sports,
have to consider who was lost and who was gained.
Sure. However, and there I come back to talent, right? I come back to projecting talent and performance based upon talent rankings. Iowa was ahead of, let's see, I looked this up earlier. I don't want to misquote here. They were ahead of Georgia in total team defense. They were ahead of Alabama in total team defense. They were well ahead of Oregon. They were ahead of Clemson. They were ahead of Texas. They were ahead of Florida State, and they were ahead of Utah as of the completion of last season. And Iowa's in the top 10 of returning production. The only guy they lost, the only major, and not that Joe Evans and Noah Shannon didn't play last year, but Joe Evans was a loss, but obviously Cooper DeJean's the big loss in the back end. They bring back 2 All-Americans at linebacker. They bring back an experienced defensive backfield led by Xavier Wampa, Quinn Schulte, Jamari Harris. I can't imagine that you can possibly, with a straight face, project teams that were not, the numbers say, were not as good as Iowa defensively last year, ahead of them this year when Iowa basically returns everybody.
So you call into question the numbers, and this is where, even though I'm considered a numbers guy by a lot of people, I'm a numbers guy within context guy. We released on our new X page the top 10 offenses, and Liberty was in there. And my response was, why in the hell is Liberty in this top 10? So let's make it clear that this does not represent me, because they are not one of the top 10 offenses in the country. They may produce numbers that say they are one of the 10 best offenses. So there is a difference there. You have to look at the schedule, have to look at the opponents.
Sure. Okay. Well, if we want to go down that rabbit hole, I guess we can. But I prefer to say, hey, Power 5, now Power 4 teams are fairly evenly evaluated as it relates to competition. And I know what you're going to say. Well, Iowa played in the Big Ten West. You're playing up against crappy offenses.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
All
what I
right.
will say.
But I would also say that Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State were going up against some real crappy defenses, and the likes of Maryland, Indiana. Rutgers has been okay at times. Um, Ohio State's offense 2 years ago was abysmal. So, uh, you know, I look at collectively of the last 5 to 10 years, Iowa's consistently there, even with more difficult schedules. Um, Iowa played a very difficult schedule 2 years ago, and I would guess was ranked above most of these teams in total defense. I'd have to go back and confirm that, but that would be my suspicion.
So statistically, if you're going to measure the stats, well, the one thing I will say, let me back up there. Yes, Iowa's been elite defensively for about 4 or 5 years. Now, before that, the couple seasons prior to, they were merely a good defense, a top 25 or 30 defense.
What
Because
years you're talking? What years are you talking
I
about?
looked at the numbers after you presented this ranking. And 2018, 2017, they were 25, 30 in the country, in that range.
Yeah. Well, uh, the offense was better. So, the defense, I would say the defense had the ball and had an assignment less often, if that makes sense. Less opportunity. Well, it depends if you're talking about, are we talking about total defense? Or are we talking about turnover production? Are we talking about points per game? What's
Talking
the,
about the best defenses.
but I know, but what metric you're saying that Iowa was,
Like
average?
yards per play. I'm not saying they were average. They were 25 or 30 in the country in
Okay.
yards per play.
So the only way I would be willing to accept these rankings is if they were paired with rankings of top defensive coordinators in the country. And if Iowa was not in the top 3 in the country, I would have a conniption. Because again, look at the 12 teams who are ahead of Iowa on this list. They're all doing it with exceptionally better talent.
So
So,
again, I'm pushing back to a certain extent, but I hope you realize from my initial statement, I am generally on board with you. I am generally in your camp. And if I had to play football this year, if I had to coach or run a football team in college football this year, and somebody gave me the Iowa defense, I would be ecstatic. I would be ecstatic. I cannot argue that any of these defenses are definitely better than Iowa. Zero of them do I think is clearly better than Iowa. I would tend to think, if you gave me a choice, that I would take Ohio State and Georgia's defenses this year. But that doesn't mean that they will be better. I tend to think that they might be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more explosive, and just downright just crazy good. But Notre Dame's going to have a great defense, and Clemson and Michigan. I really question Texas. I really question Utah.
Utah's defense was really good last year.
Florida State lost a lot off of their really good defense.
Utah's defense was really good last year as well, Mark, and they were very much similar to Iowa.
Yes. Now, I would not be surprised if we put these teams in tiers, and if the top 13 were in a tier, like if we got into the brains of EA Sports and they showed us behind the veil, and they said, well, we consider these to be the 13 best in the country, and then there's a drop off I would say, okay, I get it now. Iowa just happened to be last in line.
Another reason why, for me, it's easy for me to look at this list and say it's biased toward recruiting rankings and I mean, this is a projection as a whole, but it's biased toward individual talent rankings as opposed to maybe team production. And there is a difference. Is I see USC at number 16.
Yes, that's terrible.
Okay, but does that not?
I don't know where that's coming from, other
Well,
than they picked up one of the best defensive coordinators in the
yeah,
country and
or
one of the
or
best defensive line coaches in the country, and they have overhauled their defense.
or they're a blue blood.
But also they are going to hit the field with a radically different defense this
I'm
year.
not saying that there won't be a lot better, but Iowa also got a new offensive coordinator. And you don't see anybody projecting Iowa in the top 25 offensively.
Yeah, they don't have top 25 talent on that side of the ball.
Okay, so again, this is where we're going back to. We're going back to what we perceive individual talent to be, as opposed to a stronger emphasis on coaching and recent history. Because recent history and coaching says that USC shouldn't even be close to this list.
Yeah, but they have a different defensive coordinator and a completely different defensive staff. The entire staff is different.
Okay, and Iowa has a different offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach.
But they've never been any good on offense in recent years. And USC has at least a level of talent that could produce something like that. Iowa doesn't.
Whatever.
Does that make any sense, what I'm saying?
It makes sense. I'm just saying I still think there's a huge flaw
the first
with
thing
these
out of my
rankings.
mouth when you mentioned USC, Corey, was I said, yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
So I agree, but I'm just giving some level of justification to it.
Oh, it's easy. I can justify it.
Like
I just think these are lazy rankings. That's what I think. I think they're lazy rankings.
And the other thing I will say is Virginia Tech doesn't recruit well, and Utah doesn't. They, in terms of, for them, they do for what their purpose is, but they don't place high in the recruiting rankings. So they did give Virginia Tech and Utah high rankings without high level recruiting.
Substitute USC for Utah here, and you've cut off the number 12 team. It's Oklahoma. Substitute USC for Utah. And I can argue that this EA Sports top 12 defensive power rankings, those top 12 teams are the top 12 blue bloods in college football. Not just now, but maybe in the history of the sport. That's how I think they're lazy rankings.
Yeah, I get it. Oregon's not.
Top 12? You don't think they maybe sniff number? Maybe they. Okay, maybe they sniff number 12.
The top 12. No, so the last 15 years. Yes.
Okay, well,
absolutely, they are.
Yeah, most of the people who are doing this game aren't probably more than 30 years old, anyways.
Yeah, true. All of it true. The only last point I will make in a different approach with USC is if, and I don't know why I think of these in terms of NFL terms a little bit better. If you took the worst defense in the NFL from last year and gave them a new defensive coordinator and a new defensive staff, and I'm going to take this to an extreme, you just loaded that defense with all pros from all over the NFL, well, the projection would be that they would be much better the next season.
Sure. But you're not going to like this, Mark, but I go back to what I said. Iowa returned almost all of what it had. So
I agree with you.
So I'm saying talent. Why isn't Iowa up there with talent rankings? They have all these guys. They have guys who are all Americans, and guys who would have, like Sebastian Castro, who would have been drafted. Who cares what he was rated out of high school? As far as starting talent, Iowa is up there with every single one of these teams on the left, and is more proven than several of them.
Okay.
Right or wrong?
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
That's all I'm saying. I mean,
I'll agree
regardless
with
of what you're bringing in, Iowa's has got proven.
And absolutely,
production.
once you prove it on the collegiate level, the recruiting ranking is completely it's gone. You know, you're Sebastian Castro. You're one of the best players at your position in the country. Who cares what you got recruited? That was obviously incorrect.
And guess what? One of the guys who's not getting any All-American attention preseason is Xavier Wampa, who, by the way, was one of Iowa's rare 5-star recruits. So I'm just saying, like, any way you want to slice it, I and they're not to say that there aren't holes. There are holes. We've discussed a couple of, defensive lines probably not as deep. Maybe there's a question at depth at cornerback, but boy, I just think it's hard to argue against Iowa, and I am biased. I will admit that.
I explained the other day that everyone's biased. So I too am biased. Now, in a discussion like this, I'm not much biased, but everyone's biased to some degree. So absolutely.
Well, it's easy for you sitting here and you have Ohio State number 1.
Well, no, it's not easy.
Yes, it is. It's easy.
Why?
Of course it is. What do you mean, why? You've got Ohio State bias. They're the darlings this year. Everybody's got them number 1 in almost every category. They're projected to
They're
make.
loaded.
Well, I'm not saying there shouldn't be the
It's loaded.
favorites. I'm just saying it makes it easy on you to sit
It
back
doesn't make it easy on me. It makes it difficult on me doing what I do. I would rather be a Kansas State fan or a Stanford fan. I may change my allegiance. Maybe I'll do that.
You're not playing the games. You're not the one that has pressure. So, I mean, I would just enjoy being able to.
Well, my point is I have to endure some level of viewership that just thinks that I blow Ohio State out of proportion, but they're always in the conversation. They're just always in the conversation, so I can't avoid them.
Well, they haven't been in the. It is amazing how much that defense has ascended, because that defense was not good a couple of years ago.
Well, I mean, just in any conversation involving whatever.
Yeah.
What I would like to do, if you have 30 seconds of any kind of analysis in you, is I would love to run and grab Phil Steele's rankings and see what he has.
Sure. Yeah, you go ahead, Mark. The only thing I'll say to our viewers is USC was a surprise on this list. Colorado is a surprise on this list. And frankly, I think if I'm a Cyclone fan, I'm frustrated because they return one of the best DBs in the country in Jeremiah Cooper. And now having an offense is, a capable quarterback and a really good running back helps them overall. But I still think defensively what they have done. I was just saying, Mark, I think Iowa State got snubbed on this list.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue they absolutely should be on this list. You bring back Jeremiah Cooper and really talented defensive line. They seem to be good up there every year. Their defensive coordinator is very similar to Phil Parker and how he coaches. They have different philosophy on different things, but that's another team, and they're certainly no blue blood. So